Okay, next slide. So, 5 million British pounds. Very confident. Of course, it doesn't exist. And that's why he's so confident to offer it. No species transmutes into another one. No species goes from species A, turns into species B, turns into species C. It just doesn't exist. We would never expect that you would get half a starfish and half a fish. I mean, it makes no sense at all. And so I then would offer 10 million pounds for somebody who would find a transitional fossil. And I say it confidently. Okay, I don't have them, but you know, I would say confidently that I would offer this. I would find a way. So Dr. Babuna holds us strictly to Darwinian gradualism and step-by-step evolution. He wants to bring brothers and sisters and Muslims back to 1859, before we even discovered DNA, before we sequenced 1,000 genomes, before we could actually edit whole genomes. Well, I propose I would like to take brothers and Muslims into the 21st century, not back to 1859. I would like to see a science where we actually stick to the facts. Recently, from these 1,000 human genomes, they sequenced the genomes of a mother, a father, the entire genome of a mother, father, and the brothers and sisters, and the children. And they found approximately 200 de novo mutations, okay, in the brothers and sisters, and in the offspring, in the daughters and sons. Well, they're perfectly fine. It's just a natural process of replication of the DNA. Let me show you, and then of course, there are multitudes of studies from Richard Lenski and others who actually do studies of artificial selection on bacteria that show that many of these mutations are actually beneficial and help organisms adapt to their environment. Unfortunately, I can't counter all the claims, but I'd like to counter this one, at least in a very visual way. And I'm going to counter all these claims from my own work that has come from my own lab. No fabrication, otherwise I wouldn't be standing here in front of you today. And this is work that I've produced from the hard work of my students, PhDs, and postdocs. And the claim is, of course, that fossil species, if you take a fossil species and you take a modern species, they look exactly as they are today. Dr. Babuna says, why don't we bring fossils? I have, and I will pass it around the audience. I'll show you some of the fossils today. Why don't we bring to the next slide? Please. That's very kind of you. Okay. So this is the ant Specomyrma freyi. It was found in New Jersey, and it takes us back to 150 million years ago to New Jersey, from the rocks in New Jersey. And of course, most insects are fossilized in amber. That's the sap that comes from trees and traps the insects for a very long time. If you look at this, this fossil has a series of wasp-like and ant-like characteristics, as we would expect, because ants, bees, and wasps are all closely related. They're all cousins to one another. And subhanAllah, there is a Surat al-Naml and Surat al-Nahl in the Quran. Anyway, so the ants are derived wasps, and it has a series of wasp-like and ant-like characteristics. Of course, next slide, please. You can pick any ant species. I mean, there are thousands of ants. Ants are crawling everywhere. They're part of our daily lives. And you can pick an ant species, like this ant from the genus Formica, and say, look, they look similar. There's no evolution. Well, I challenge you, brothers and Muslims, to spend some time digging in nature, and you will see the remarkably endless forms that exist in there. And I would like to see Dr. Babuna explain the diversity that we see in the following slides. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Well, maybe not that fast. I mean, okay, next slide, please. Okay. I mean, there's remarkable. What I want to show you is just the remarkable diversity. This looks nothing like the fossil. There are blue ants. Next slide, please. I mean, just to mention, of course, he forgot to mention that not all animals have appeared in that period. There are animals that are not included in the Cambrian period that appear later, and that doesn't even include plants. Are we so arrogant to say that we shouldn't include plants in Allah's creation. Plants are not included in the Cambrian creation. They come much later. And even part of my own work, next slide, a paper I published in 1998, next slide. Here, you would expect if all animals appeared at the same time, it would be like a tree. Everything would just simultaneously appear from this radiation. While many animals that appear do, the animals which include humans don't. You can actually reconstruct differences. So even our expectations, there are some that don't expect to a sudden appearance. So the origination can include afterwards. Okay, next slide. Okay, so this is the final thing, this idea that a protein, so he's using
three different drawings, half ape, half man. But that kind of things never lived in the past. It's three different drawings, half ape, half man. But that kind of things never lived in the past.
You can't get half a protein, you need many proteins. And in the same way, you need an eye, a complete eye. Well, I've already showed you that in nature exist many different intermediate steps in an eye. And it applies to the cell as well. And what I'm going to show you some of my own work on water striders. This will take literally just a couple of seconds, but it's really fun. And I just want to end it off with, you know, evolution can actually be very fun science. Next slide. This will just take a couple. I'm just going to tell you about water striders. Water striders are animals that live their entire lives on the water surface. They use their mid legs as oars and their hind legs as rudders. SubhanAllah, perfectly adapted to rowing on the water surface. If you've been to any ponds in the UK, you will see them floating on the surface of the water. Next slide. Next slide. Okay. Well, in these animals, there's a huge sexual conflict between males and females. And what you can see, of course, is this is different from the species I showed you. These are the females that have normal-looking antennae. The males have these incredibly elaborated antennae here. This was recently published. We published this year in Science. My team, in collaboration with the University of Toronto and my postdoc. So here are these incredibly elaborate antennae. Next slide. Okay. Well, what we discovered, of course, is that they have these amazing spines and hooks and pads. Next slide. And these are perfectly adapted, like it is for swimming on the water. These spikes fit right in the back of the eyes. Next slide. And the hooks fit right underneath. So I'm just going to wrap up, but I'm just going to finish this one example. So here, right underneath. So it serves like a perfectly adapted system. Males evolve more armory to subdue the females, and the females fight back in a sexual conflict. And you would imagine that if you took away this armory of the male would be defenseless. The female would just kick him off. Okay? And next slide. Is it possible to show the link really quick? It's a 20-second link. See if he can. He's going to do it. He's going to see. I'm just going to show you what this conflict looks like. And then I'll get to the point of the irreducible complexity in a second. Okay. So this is narrated by my postdoc, by the way, Abdurrahman Kila, another Muslim who graduated.
Has a normal highly modified antenna.
So
he approaches from behind and jumps on the back of the female.
So he's using his antennae
with his antenna open. Then he clasps the antenna around her head. With the antenna in place, he pulls the female backward to flip it. Both male and female are now upside down, continuing to struggle. He then starts whipping his long legs to neutralize the female's attempts to extract herself before he flips her back again to normal posture. Finally,
that's enough, thanks.
He uses his crooked rear legs to bring female's body.
So the idea is he uses the antennae, he grips her, we can actually look at it, we can see them in this struggle, we can actually measure the mating success. What we've done, next slide please, very quickly. Up in the next minute, next slide. So there are actually techniques that we can actually knock down the genes. We can disrupt the genes and look at the effect of what they have on the animal. And we've discovered that a gene called distalis, which is present in all animals, including humans, by the way. If you knock down distalis, you can actually get rid of these spikes and these hooks. If you knock it down early in the development, it has all kinds of nasty effects. It makes the limbs smaller. That's why they call it distalis. But if you knock it down very late in development, it's very specific to these hooks, spikes, and pads, and it essentially eliminates them. But what we discovered was something very interesting. The behavior is not affected at all. It's just literally specific to these hooks, spikes, and pads. Next slide. What we discovered is that we can actually, by knocking down the gene in small doses, you can actually reduce this remarkable complexity in this adaptation of these limbs. You can actually take them down in gradual degrees. And when you actually knock it down in gradual degrees, you don't eliminate its function right away. You knock down the mating success of the male slowly but surely. Ladies and gentlemen, you don't need a complete protein to be effective. You just need a little bit of a cell, a little bit of a protein, a little bit of an eye, a little bit of hooks, spikes to have some advantage. And with that, as I said, I'll have a closing remark, but I would like Dr. Babuna to explain some of these results. Thank you very much.